let's jump into this. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you. For all of you in cyberspace, it's a pleasure to have you join us. Let me just do a really brief introduction of Lydia. Lydia Manikonda, she's an associate professor at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and she is a member of the Artificial Intelligence Research Collaboration and a whole lot more, and a true expert in artificial intelligence. My name is Beth Fitch, and I am a lawyer that practices in data privacy and cybersecurity, and am fascinated and petrified artificial intelligence. So I'm very excited to learn more from you, Lydia, about artificial intelligence and the implications for us as individuals and certainly as society as a whole. But I think before we do that, you have such an amazing journey yourself has gotten you to this point of being an expert in this area. I think people should just hear from you about, where you started and how you've arrived at where you are today. So why don't we start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your, growing up in India? I think that'd be a really great place to start.
Thank you, Beth. As Beth shared about me, I live in New York right now, upstate New York, and I'm an assistant professor at RPI. So I was born and brought up in India, and my parents both are strong believers, and I'm truly blessed and grateful for that blessing, actually. And growing up, I think I mentioned this in the little video clip as well. I have seen my parents, their love, unconditional love, and being open to not be biased, in any way, because I have a younger brother too. And there are a few so India is traditionally conservative in a way that women are traditionally homemakers. And I have seen, growing up, how at a certain age, women tend to get married early and start families. And being in that culture, because I grew up in a small city, and so there's a lot of these cultural aspects where, being a woman and having those kinds of, expectations per se, could have actually many times led to situations where you tend to actually give up your education or your plans to study further and so on. But I'm very grateful that my parents actually gave me opportunities to, pursue my dreams and goals, and wanted us to get good education. And I always wanted to be a medical professional, and because I think growing up, that's where I saw that how people are making difference in individuals' lives. And I came from my cousins are medical doctors, but at some particular point of time, I decided I think that's not for me because, of various reasons. But yeah, so I did my undergraduate and then pursued my master's in India as well. And during that time, I came to University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, to work on a project which was funded by NASA. And that's where I first came to United States in 2011. So rest of the things, I actually then started my PhD in 2013. And so originally I thought, I can graduate in like 5 years, but it actually went beyond that. But even though it was a difficult and interesting, challenging journey, I think my faith has helped me a lot in becoming, who I am today, to be able to overcome those challenges or obstacles, and then um, be a friend of science and at the same time be a friend of faith.
So I think that's really interesting. I mean, you said that even though you grew up in India and is very conservative, and the expectation was that you would uh, just get married and have children. I mean, your parents, though, if I heard you, they really came alongside you. Were they? Was your mother, in particular, very encouraging of you to pursue a career?
Oh yes, but I would say that she's a she's a strong believer, and at the same time she is a greatest influencer of women, because I mean, it's not just in my life. Whenever I go home to visit my parents, I meet different women at church or at a grocery store somewhere, and they keep telling me how much she encouraged them, and she always instilled in me that as a Christian woman, we need to work hard and we need to make a difference in the society, and I am truly grateful for her.
So is that something that really has sustained you as you've had to overcome obstacles pursuing your career?
Definitely, but actually, in fact, she was my greatest and strongest believer, I guess. In some
Yeah.
moments, even though I never believed myself, she encouraged me to. When I told my, I mean, because of the culture, we are very close. I mean, of course, here too. But when I told my parents that I want to pursue PhD, and there was a situation where my dad was like, okay, is that a good thing for you? But my mom was extremely supportive in terms of um,
Mhm.
pursuing those dreams. And I grew up in a church where, like I said, it's a small town, and not very supportive in terms of why do you want to study? I mean, why, as a woman, why do you need that much education? So I think
Right.
that's
I'm
the kind of
sure.
environment I grew up in. But I'm very grateful for strong supporters like my parents, to especially my mom, to help me. And even right now, I mean, till today, so she's a very good supporter of mine, and I'm truly grateful for that.
So I'm sure when you were growing up, really artificial intelligence probably wasn't even on your radar screen. Where was it where your that's your spark for artificial intelligence came?
So in my undergrad, actually, during my undergraduate studies, I took a neural networks class. And so neural networks are, you can think of them as, I mean, they imitate human brains, like different neurons and their connections and so on. And during that time, that was the first time I uh, learned about, like, as a course, I learned about how neurons work, I mean, how neural networks work and different algorithms and so on. But I never actually, to be honest, I never paid a lot of attention, honestly. I was fascinated by how efficient they are. But and I took an artificial intelligence class as well, and I worked on a particular project to create an artificial intelligence bot to play a game. So that game is called Arima, and it's a variant of chess in terms of two-player game and how to make strategies and so on. So, but I always was fascinated with data,
Hmm.
like gigantic, humongous amounts of data. And when I sent in my application for PhD, when I heard from my PhD advisor, I mean, he's a humble researcher, extremely smart, and he's a pioneer of AI. And working with him actually opened the doors to this. And thinking about different aspects of AI and machine learning, and how we as humans are trying to build these systems to think and reason like humans. So I think those are the channels through how I eventually, came across and started developing and asking questions like why and how does this work, and how are
Mhm.
different mental models, how are decision making systems working, and so on. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about AI, because I think there's, no matter what discipline of science you're in, or just as no matter what discipline you're in, period, there is, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding about artificial intelligence, and I think there's some healthy fear about it as well, the ethics of it. And so I know when we were talking offline, you said there are three sort of foundational principles that you really are focusing on. And let's just talk about those three foundational principles. I think they're really important for us all to understand and live by. So,
Yeah. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, I mean, what exactly is artificial intelligence? And what is the meaning of machine learning, and how do these terms work? And so the main thing we are doing here is how are we building systems, or how are we building these artificial systems that essentially think and reason and behave like humans, at the end of the
right.
day. But I don't think our current systems are at that level in terms of human cognition. But um, so that's where there's like you mentioned, there's this healthy fear.
Yes.
So right now, researchers, especially those who are leading this field, are focusing on different aspects of accountability, transparency, and fairness. So, for example, um, let's actually look at just this. I mean, I actually have some notes written. So, definitions of like this accountability and fairness. So, accountability is trying to be responsible and taking that responsibility, right? And also, transparency is in such a way that the system is transparent. Let's say if the system is helping make decisions for individuals, okay,
Mhm.
so in which way are these decisions being made, and can we actually rely on them, can we trust them, and then at the same time being fair, like not being impartial just because let's say, for example, I mean, I think moving forward we'll talk about this. Just because I came from a particular country, let's say, is the system acting fair towards me, or is it being biased towards me? These are the kinds of things that we are thinking about. Especially, these are the three main fundamental principles um,
Well, let's
that
talk
have
about
been.
fairness. I think fairness of those is the most interesting, because we all, as humans, have unconscious bias. And if, as humans, we're designing artificial intelligence, is there going to be bias baked in to any AI?
That's a great question, Beth. And so what's unconscious bias? I mean, unconscious bias is something where we as individuals have these, um, unconsciously we have some stereotypes towards certain entities. So, for example, some of the most documented unconscious biases are related to race and gender, but
Right.
these unconscious biases could also come into picture. Let's say, for example, um, weight, or let's say religion or religious views, and so on. So the question that you're asking is, when we are building these systems, is unconscious bias slowly creeping in? I think that's the most important thing that we need to ask. And that's where we need to have a team of experts working on these kinds of systems, where these experts also should be diverse in terms of different fields, different backgrounds. So recently, I hosted a workshop at an AI conference, which is about AI for scientific discovery. And one of the points one researcher was bringing is this. So, for example, when we are building these systems, let's say AI systems, they are actually being built from the perspective of computer science. But if we are using these systems for medicine, can we use them? You know, because there might be some unconscious biases that are coming in from the field of computer science. So if we are plugging them in terms of medical medical situations, let's say for example, predicting if these particular x-rays tell us if, you know, this is more like prone to cancer or not. I'm just making up an example. So
Yeah,
in
sure.
those kinds of situations, how are we going to deal with them, you know? So that's where I think we need a lot of diverse teams working together.
And are you seeing that now? Is there sufficient diversity around the design and development of AI, or do we really need to work at introducing more diversity into that process?
I think we are working towards that. There's a lot of, I mean, especially with the current dynamics in the society and, you know, various issues. I think, especially with regard to pandemic, I mean, starting from whether to wear a mask or not, or do you believe in vaccines, these kinds of problems. I mean, these are kind of things which actually tells us like whether as a society we are believing these technologies, you know, like believing science and so on. So to answer your question, I think we are definitely moving forward with in those directions to bring in, you know, more experts from different backgrounds and different thinking perspectives, and then, you know, giving them voice to uh, equally, like in the sense, in an unbiased manner, um, building these systems together. But I think we definitely are going in that direction. So, yeah.
Okay, I have a question that I think it ties into this. Well, it's and this is the question. It's, you know, AI systems rely on physical sensors, and sensors and measurements have a dynamic range. So every measurement is biased towards its own dynamic range. So the question is, that's the setup for the question, which is I'm sorry, is the effort then to try and build a zero bias system a futile exercise, or is there one that can be achieved at great cost? And if so, you know, what is that great cost? I think it's a really good question. You know, it's always at risk. It's always in everything we do, a risk benefit analysis. So, I mean, you're in a very important area doing that work. What do you think about that?
I think, first of all, this is a great question, and thank you, Professor for asking this. And even though our goal is to move towards zero bias systems, I think there's error in, you know, every situation, and um, I think, I mean, I think our end goal is to uh, learn these trade-offs, like where is the system being good and what are its drawbacks, and that's where I think the transparency comes into picture. You know, like how well can we actually understand and use these results of these AI systems to the particular question or problem that we are solving, and yeah, so I think that's where transparency is very important in these systems. And I can definitely say, so for example, a few years back, I was working on a robo soccer system where, you know, you are trying to train the robot to kick a ball, and you say just like go from point A to point B, and it just doesn't go. It just goes from point A to point C. And if you are actually having this much error, so how, when you are deploying these systems in real world scenarios, how are you going to handle these errors or biases, you know? So that's a very, very important question, and I think this actually we can discuss this for like hours and hours, but I will stop my answer over there. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I think the point is a good one. I mean, transparency, I think, his comment back is that so that everyone can see. If not, the transparency is a realistic goal. But I think going back to those three foundational principles, as long as you need to focus on those three foundational principles: accountability, transparency, and fairness at all times. And when you're doing development and design. So I want to move on. Because I want to talk about what you're doing with AI to help solve problems that have plagued the public health since the beginning of time. And that really is, there's lots of public health issues. There's mental illness, there's drug addiction, but much more common to all of us is alcoholism and smoking. And so tell us about what you're doing in those areas, because I think that's, fundamentally bettering humanity through AI.
Yeah, so one of the threads of research that I have been focusing on is mental health and personal goals towards achieving, good health. So, for example, I start. So one of the questions. So based on my personal experiences in my personal life, I have this burden to understand different perspectives of, let's say, for example, why do people go on social media platforms? So let's say, for example, to talk about mental health issues and what exactly is going on in those areas, and why is this platform playing a key, like an important role in these kinds of, public health crisis situations. So and in that, from that perspective, I was looking at people coming to these platforms and like discussing about and maintaining accountability with each other in order to, let's say, quit smoking or quit drinking. And so how can we actually build systems, build technologies to help these individuals in their decision making scenarios? So that's one of the problems that I have been thinking about. So let's say if individuals are trying to achieve these goals or break these addictions, so how are they taking steps, and how is this community of people helping these individuals to achieve those goals? And can we actually leverage these systems which can automatically extract these kinds of, mental models, like human mental models, and try to understand and actually empower them by giving them the right set of information, and at the same time um, make the right choice. So for example, one of the things, commonly observed things I see on these platforms are, less judgment and trying to understand each other's, I mean, these are, fortunately or unfortunately, even though we are technologically advancing at a very fast pace, some of these things are still stigmatized. And I think that's where people are coming to these platforms to share and open up their problems with one another who are going through similar kinds of situations. And so with this being said, how can we actually build decision making systems that, first of all, can help these individuals like receive the right set of information, like finding the right, because there's huge amount of data, right? So, and at the
Right.
same time also, let's say if somebody who is trying to join this and these kinds of platforms and trying to understand how people are, benefiting, what are the kinds of actions that they are taking, and how are they achieving their goals. So that's one of the problems that I have been looking at, and it's just fascinating because we are unique in our own ways. So one thing, like one specific system may not work for everybody. So in this particular scenario, how are we building these technologies to address everybody's um, needs, and at the same time, again, going back to these three principles that we talked about.
So, and what are you seeing in terms of the AI interface with these platforms? I mean, are you actually seeing progress in that respect?
Um, that's I I cannot answer that question at this point of time, Beth. But the thing is, there are a lot of other questions that we have to think about too, like in the sense, are these, is this ethical? And like I said, one solution doesn't meet everybody's needs. So how are we handling,
Right.
these kinds of issues and so on? So yeah, it's a very complicated scenario and situation. So I think it's, again, going back to these fundamental principles, is a
Right.
very important thing that we have to keep in mind as researchers. So
Well,
yeah.
I thought you said something really important as well, which is that in other contexts, smoke, accountability around smoke. There's been judgment
Right.
around, and as Christians, we're called not to judge,
Mhm.
but yet, even in all these support groups that have Christian values, there's still this feeling of judgment. And so I think that's really powerful what you said about how AI can help eliminate, that feeling of judgment.
Mhm. Yeah, so again, I want to make this very clear. I'm not actually promoting that AI will solve all the humans' problems
Of
here,
course.
but we are using this as a tool to um, help humans, thrive and help humans grow and, help one another and then thrive. Actually, I should just say that. So, um, in that context, yeah, how are we going to build these systems in a way that they are fair in terms of um, promoting different decisions? For example, let's actually take a very simple example. Recently, I don't want to name the entities, but they were showing specific, ads that actually hurt certain marginalized communities. And
Hmm.
because thing is, algorithms are being trained in such a way that, let's say, for example, I mean, this is a commonly seen thing where on social media platforms, there's a situation where, you in lots of scenarios, they buy likes and comments and so on. And let's say, for example, you write an algorithm which actually promotes the posts that have more likes and comments, for example, let's say. So in
Right.
those scenarios, you are actually, first of all, doing something wrong in terms of, buying these likes and comments. I mean, this is very simple example that I'm giving, but at the same time, if these algorithms are actually trying to learn these patterns and then trying to show these kinds of things which are actually hurtful to some people, so how are you going to mitigate these kinds of risks? So this is just a simple example that I'm giving, but there are like very big problems out there. So I mean, another example is recently how, Apple credit card was actually biasing women in terms of, even though they have like good credit history and whatnot, but in the same family they are actually allowing men to have the credit card.
Right.
At the same time, women can't have it. So there are these kinds of issues, So how are we going to actually build these systems in such a way they can act in a fair way?
So let's take that example. I think that's a really great example. So the intent behind the algorithm was not to overtly be biased, right? The
Right,
intent
right.
wasn't let's give men an advantage over women. There's no thinking around
Exactly.
the design of that. But
That's right.
how from a
That's
scientific,
right.
how did
That's
that
right.
happen? How did that evolve so that actually
Mm,
was the outcome?
mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a highly debatable topic, but I personally think that because these machines are being trained on specific data set, and they are actually catching these patterns from the data and then behaving though. I mean, spitting them out those exact patterns. But
Yeah.
so one of the I advocate systems where humans and machines can work together, which actually can, to some extent, may solve these kinds of problems.
Mhm.
But are we there yet? And how can we make this transition smoother and make it possible? So there's a specific community that works on these kinds of approaches as well, where bringing humans into the loop, and then when there are these kinds of very critical judgments to make, and can humans actually uh, complement that kind of a cognitive power to the system, and then make more fair judgments, so those are the things that are actually being focused on at this point of time, but by the research community.
So you mentioned social media. Are
Mhm.
you in favor of social media, or do you think that it's a negative? Well, what's your thoughts on social media and the AI that drives it?
First of all, this is my personal, answer to this. And personally, I work on problems that are related to public health and specifically very stigmatized topics. So from that perspective, I strongly believe that social media is a very powerful tool in terms of giving voice to the voiceless, because these platforms are protecting your true identity, but at the same time they are actually being giving you the platform to be your true self. So it's giving the voice to these voiceless people to get encouraged. And so for example, alcoholism or like addictions, and where let's say you can't share with your, let's say, partner or with your family, but in those scenarios, how do you deal with these kinds of things? And I'm a strong believer in these platforms in those scenarios. Of course, there's a lot of fake news, bullying, and horrible things happening, but at the same time, scenarios like these public health issues, I think social media is playing a very important role in creating. These are becoming like echo chambers for individuals in vulnerable situations, and yeah, so I think they are playing a very key role with. So.
So I love what you said, that social media gives voice to the voiceless, and gives a platform for those to voice their uh, whatever their pains and issues and complaints are, the disenfranchised. Do you have concerns about the manipulation of the vulnerable
Mhm.
on social media? And
Definitely, but that's one of the threads of research that I actually recently started focusing on, especially in the context of conspiracy theories and fake news. And um, there's research suggesting that, in fact, those who never use social media, and I mean, I don't want to be wrong here, but I will say yes, that social media is actually playing a key role in terms of um, m- promoting manipulative information. Yes, definitely. And so that's where right now there's a lot of research efforts being poured into to how do we first of all detect this kind of information, and how do we mitigate this and combat it. And that's a very I mean, because it's actually impacting communities, impacting
right,
nations, right? So
yes.
yeah, so that's a very very you know current important topic that we have to focus on, especially the research community is focusing on.
Well, let's talk about that in the context also of your Christian walk, because foundationally to Christianity is the belief on the Bible is the absolute truth.
Mhm.
And now we're facing currently where the words are fake news, but it's actually an attack on truth. What is truth? And so
Mhm.
how do you reconcile that, or what is your thoughts on how to combat that from not your Christian perspective and your scientific perspective?
Yeah, so I was actually listening to some of the talks, before this session, and one of them, they are talking about coming from astronomical sciences and faith in God. And so what is truth in that context? What is truth, and who defines this truth? And being a Christian and having certain faith, how do you define truth? And
Mm-hmm.
all of us have these. I mean, I don't want to talk about philosophy, and I'm not a philosopher, so. But
But you have a very important point of view. So you don't have to be a philosopher, but you have a very important point of view. So.
thank you, Beth. So let's say, for example, if you assume that I'm going to talk from the scientific perspective. Let's
Okay.
say data is suggesting from the beginning, let's assume that I don't know when that beginning starts, but let's say it's ever since we started documenting various things that are happening in the society, let's say we are focusing on a particular topic, and can we, use algorithms to identify what is truth and what is not truth? Can you do that? Just because there are lots of data points suggesting a hypothesis A is correct, does that mean that's truth? So
Right.
so that's where I think we as humans are gifted with this ability to think, reason, and judge in terms of whether something is truthful or not. And yeah, so I think from my perspective, I'm not gonna go into any controversial, reasoning here, but it, I don't. I mean, it's a very tricky situation, but as a, like I said, as a person who believes in science, and I'm a person who also believes in faith. I think faith sometimes gives you that solid rock of, what is truth. And that's where I would like to actually end our conversation too, in terms of what does the scripture talk about, truth, and what are the greatest commandments that actually the scripture talks about. And I mean, as we all know, um, I think this is in Matthew, right? Matthew 22nd chapter. So where somebody asks, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus responds saying like, love your Lord with all your heart, mind, and soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So I think I would like to end this conversation there. So as researchers, friends of science, and friends of faith, are we actually building and enabling these technologies to act in a non-judgmental, fair manner, where we are going to defend and speak up for those who cannot speak, and are these technologies we are building reflecting these kinds of uh, aspects in terms of maintaining these three principles that we started talking about, accountability, transparency, and fairness. So I think that's where I will actually, you know, um, stop this conversation. But yeah, um, yeah.
I think that's really powerful to end it there because, I mean, Lydia, you are in a unique position because you are a brilliant mind and you're young and you're in a position where you're going to just continue to excel. And so, sometimes I think we talked about this, that you feel like you don't have a voice in your context. And then, so, how do we overcome our own lack of voice so that we can speak for others? And I think I just want to commend you for the work that you're doing and trying to give voice to the voiceless. I think it's amazing.
Thank you, Beth.
So
thank you so much, Beth. But can I add one last thing?
yes.
I mean, I'm just beginning right now. There are like great minds, I mean, with a lot of experience, and especially yesterday's talk, I was thinking about, and of course, you too, how much you have accomplished and learned. And I hope that, I'll be able to continue working towards these kinds of systems um, that are actually able to help humans to thrive and grow, you know. So that's my hope and passion. So yeah, thank you so much, Beth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we are out of time. I really, again, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. And I know there's a networking event later today. So hopefully, we can all meet up again in that context.